Hello and welcome into the SorareData Football Strategy Show. I'm Andrew Laird. You can find me as a Lairdinho on Sorare. Today, joining me with Sean Newsham, PSU fans too. I'm already messing up after my week off. But today, I decided to come back and try to get Sean to talk about something he would never talk about, which is trying to figure out a way to play this game without spending more money. Sean, good to see you. Oh, and you're muted. Man, I'm the one on back on vacation.
Wow. I woke up. I overslept an alarm today, so I'm like out of it. Yeah, fresh off his his suspension. He comes back and he just drops a topic that just is an irrelevant topic when we all know the answer to that. But no, it's a good topic. It's a good topic. Well, I'll give him that.
So the reason I wanted to talk about this, and before I even get into that, actually, special thank you, big thank you to Josh Forth for filling in last week. I found last week's show very helpful and entertaining, and got me to this topic today. And I was less concerned about having Josh on because it had nothing to do with what Josh said, even though this whole thing is really about, well, not all about him, but he's the reason I wanted to talk about this. And yeah, it was a great show. And I feel like it was nice to have someone else on. Like I don't, whenever I listen back to the show, whenever I do, I just hear us, and it was nice to hear another voice. So I think maybe we'll try to get some other people on just to, I feel like you and I know a lot of sharp people, and we're not necessarily taking advantage of sharing their sharpness with others, but we'll see. But anyway, the reason it all came to this topic today was Josh last week describing how he was all set up, and then the Zagreb game got postponed, and he was dead with his Zagreb stack. And you were like, well, yeah, obviously you just like buy more players and like fill it in. And it didn't. Josh is actually in a kind of a tougher position because he plays basically at the super rare level, and it's like, hey, just go get some more super rares. It's like not the easiest thing to do. Price agnostic in terms of that comment, but like the whole buy more players or buy more cards is obviously the solution most of the time. And we all know this, that like if we all had a lot more money and you lost a few cards to games being postponed or players getting, a fifth yellow last weekend and now you're not set up. And part of the discussion that you guys had was about how his gallery is like super efficient. Like he's not that deep. He doesn't have a lot of like extra players laying around that he can just like throw into lineups. And I feel like it was worth us discussing kind of what happens if you do have, maybe not even if you do have some extra players, but if you don't have extra ETH or cash like laying around and can put it in the game, what are the situations where it's actually worth kind of selling or trading some of the cards that you have that maybe you had planned on for the future in order to help you like immediately? And like, that's sort of where I wanted this conversation to go.
Yeah. There's definitely ways to change things within your gallery and make your gallery make more sense. I think that people go overboard with it sometimes. I saw Haber was here. Haber's one of them. Haber will come in and like sell all 15 key depth pieces he has to get one super rare in. And then he just is like the next day he's like, man, I really need like 8 of these rares. I'm like, oh shit, you need 8 of these rares. So it's like a fine line that you can go down to like get rid of depth pieces, get rid of pieces that maybe you only use so often. Because I think something people struggle with is they're like, oh, this card I use 2 of 4 game weekends a year, or 2 of 4 game weekends a month. And well, that's a valuable card. That's like a card that's usable. Cards you want to get rid of are like, all right, I literally never use this card. Or like, I use this card once every 3 months. Cards that you use frequently are still valuable cards and carry the place that they have.
Yeah, I think it's more there will be a point where you have what you think is like the nut lineup. Mm-hmm. And you think this a week out, and you look at the matchups and you're like, this is my week. And it doesn't always work out, but like you will have an opportunity where everyone's at home, they're all huge favorites. And then you're watching the game the weekend before and you see the guy get his dumb 5th yellow for like taking his shirt off, and he's like, oh, he's suspended next week. And maybe you don't have someone that's that great to put in that lineup. at what point do you say, like, maybe I do need to sacrifice a few of these cards that I do use just to get like the right piece in this nut lineup that I have, or is that never really worth it?
Yeah, it's to me, and we've talked about this before, like you and I have talked about this before. The only times I realistically think it makes sense to bring in a new card, and that's a we're talking about like you go out and buy a card specifically for a game week, is one, if you have a chance, if you like legit have a chance to hit a podium and you're looking at that lineup and you're like, I could bring in this card and this is like the best lineup that could realistically be made, I think I should probably do that. Two, if that card that you're bringing in can be utilized long term in your gallery. Now, also you can sort of buy it and then resell it after that game weeks, but that can be risky as well. But like, yeah, the time you should look at buying cards, like you have a 4-man group and you're like, wow, I have this hole that really can't be fixed within my lineup and my gallery. And then if I go buy this card, it's literally pretty much the best lineup that can be ran out there. And I have a good shot at hitting like a top 10. That's pretty much when I think is the time you should like go buy a card. Luis just asked, what is long-term on Sorare? To me, it would be like going forward. Like if I'm going to be able to use that card that I'm bringing in going forward in lineups, and it's not just going to be like I'm using it this game week and then I'll never use it again and it'll just sit in my gallery. So if I'm looking at like, let's say this midweek coming up, I have a Galatasaray stack. They have a God matchup. I have 4 guys that I'm very confident are going to play, and I don't have a forward. And I look at Dusan Tadic and I'm like, man, if I bring in Dusan Tadic, this card is great and this lineup is unbelievable. Going forward, I can use Dusan Tadic in key lineups, and that will be a big help for me. So it won't just be wasted on this 1 week. That's kind of my interpretation of like a card you should go buy or a card that you can make sense. It doesn't have to just be like a Dusan Tadic in a key lineup. It could be like, all right, I'm very short at forward and I'm buying I don't know, Mauro Icardi, and pretend Icardi's not that good. And you're like, well, we'll be able to use Icardi every week. Maybe he won't go in my key lineup every week, but every week I'll find a place for him in some lineup. So like maybe this week he'll be in Cap 240 rare. This week he'll be in Challenger Rare Pro. Next week he'll be in All-Star Rare. And it's just like a card that you will use almost every week, but maybe not in a key lineup. Those are sort of the ideas that I would have in terms of cards I would want to bring in. And if that situation arises, also like you realize holes you have within your gallery as you build lineups. As you're building lineups for each game week going into the future, you're like, all right, this is a spot where I'm pretty shallow in. I probably could use some enhancements here if I have the ability to move some pieces out elsewhere. Like if you're going into a game week and you have like 15 rare mids that are elite and you just have great rare mids, and then you look at your defense and you're trotting out some turd box every week and then another turd box, and you're like, well, shit, I have 15 great mids. Sometimes it's a good opportunity for you to move out of those mids and move into some defenders to sort of bolster that position instead.
So I think you kind of half answered the question. Well, actually, maybe you answered the question. I didn't phrase it well. But so the example of like, yeah, just bring Tadic in. There's really never a bad time to bring in Tadic.
Correct.
And it's not, the question isn't, should I bring in Tadic? It's, should I sacrifice other cards to get him? So like the example from last week when Josh was saying he has 2 Joseph Missick super rares and he uses them. Like he uses them, but last week, this current game week, he couldn't because Zagreb was off. So it was like, at what point and what considerations need to be made for Josh to say, I'm going to get rid of one of my Missick or any other card that's like, maybe Missick's a bad example with him because that's a very important card, but like still there cards that are important in your gallery in order to fill these lineups. And you can still fill them with players that you will continue to use in the future. But it's fundamentally, I feel like we constantly are like, yeah, just go out and like get that player. But for most people who don't sit on ETH balances or cash balances or have like tons of depth that is usable to get, that is good enough to get good players, it's really about sacrificing cards that you have acquired, that you had plans for, in order to get others to save your lineups for this game week or maybe 2 game weeks.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, I mean, the idea here is we're talking about like what you could do in these situations. And then Haber's giving me shit. Javier's giving me shit. They're saying spend more money. That's how we lead into this discussion, guys. So I think that a thing that people need to do is people need to sacrifice. That is the key word here, right? Sacrifice. If you're looking at your lineups and you have to decide, I need to sell Carlos Gil to bring in Dusan Tadic, that's a sacrifice you're having to make because you don't have the funds to go buy cards. You have to make a move. Or maybe you don't have depth and you need to bring in 3 pieces. So you're bringing in like 3 pieces that are lower quality than Carlos Gil. And you're like, I need to bring in, I have no depth. So this Carlos Gil card really doesn't get me much out of it because I need more cards. So it's like I can turn Carlos Gil into Hani Mukhtar, Kai Wagner, and Drew Easy. I don't know what the prices are on those. But so like you can look at it and be like, I can bring in these 3 pieces instead of this one, gets me additional value, still have some solid pieces. Or maybe you need a bunch of depth and you just bring in 5 pieces that are not the best, but you have to do it. So the way I would look at it is I would look at it in terms of like, this is what my lineups are going to look like if I make this move. This is what they're going to be like on one side. This is what they'll look like on the other. And then I'll have to sit there and try to decide what makes the most sense of those avenues. And you have to look out a little bit. Like you have to try to look out maybe a month or 2 months into advance and see like, okay, this is how it's going to affect me. This is how it's going to impact me. I also think the biggest sacrifice that people do not like to make, but it's one that you should be making, you do not have to have a lineup every single game week. And it's something that people struggle with. People want to have a lineup every game week because they want to have an investment every game week so that they're entertained. Because again, as we've talked about before, Sorare is very heavy in the entertainment platform area of things. Like that's why you play. Like even if you want to win, like it's still entertainment. Like you want to win, so you want to get to advance. A lot of the time, people just buy cards for game weeks, and you just don't have to do that. Especially like in situations like the prize pools are typically not that great. A lot of the time, card weeks that people want to bring in a card and buy for that individual game week, they're buying for a lineup that's not very good to begin with. And in that situation, you should just not invest funds into that game week, because when you do that, and you do that every game week, like let's say you invest 0.05 ETH every single game week, it adds up quickly. You're saying here that you don't have funds. Well, the reason you don't have funds is because you probably do stuff like that. So I think one of the best sacrifices you can make is just looking at a line being like, well, it's not that great this game week. I'm not going to buy a card to replace it. I'm instead going to focus going forward on cards that make more sense longer term. Or I'm going to be like, I don't have cards that make sense for this game week. I'm going to look at how I can enhance myself in the future and not worry about this.
So that's exactly where I was heading. So I'm glad you got there, because the way I was thinking of it, and the way that, I mean, I have some Zagreb cards that I couldn't use this weekend, and apparently next weekend also, like we're getting, well, who knows what that one will end up being. But it felt like the conversation never got there of like, maybe you just don't play them this week. And I think the way that I look at it, that I initially looked at it, was like, man, you're like losing utility with these cards, but postponed games don't mean you're losing utility. Now you might, and there are situations where, you know, we have a team that is supposed to play on the weekend. This is basically what happened with the K-League when they changed the deadline and all of this stuff, that you were like, well, if I had my goalie that was supposed to be on the weekend, now they're midweek, it's not just that I'm losing one card. It's like, maybe I don't have a goalie now for the weekend. And so I'm technically losing utility. But the way that, like, I think Josh runs, well, he doesn't, well, the whole conversation with how he doesn't run like full stacks that much anymore. But like, if you had like the full Zagreb stack and you lost the Zagreb game this weekend, at some point they are going to play that game. My guess is it's like a midweek. And now you're like, hey, you actually have utility in that midweek. The problem is if you don't have like, I don't have 5 Zagreb, like a 5-player Zagreb stack. So it could be a possibility that they play a midweek and I don't have like a goalie or someone to make a lineup. But we did, like, my initial thought was immediately like, oh, you're like losing utility. And I basically had to like remind myself that no, there will be a game. Like it's just going to happen at a different time. And yeah, sometimes you just don't play the lineup. Like you just don't play one.
Yeah.
And I think most people have other cards. It's not like you're losing everything. And so I think that that was just sort of the important thing that I wanted to get to, that there are some times where, and I feel like a lot of times when people buy cards for game weeks, it's just to have a lineup. It's actually not because it's really good and they're like, I don't want to lose these matchups. You have whoever you have in your lineup and they're all home against like whoever the bottom dwellers. But usually it's just like, I just need a card for lineup. And that's where the mistakes like really happen.
Yeah. I think that's definitely a key with things, is that's how things happen. Also, like you talked about, like if your game gets postponed and you have 3 guys in that one team and it gets postponed to a random midweek where there's no games, you're just kind of boned a little bit in terms of your production. That's what Haber brings up. He says people overlook stacking, and that's why stacking is a positive. Like if you have 5 guys on one team and you have a full lineup in one team, when that team plays, you have a full lineup in theory. Obviously, could be rotation, could be injuries, but in theory, you have a full team. So Javier asked a question, and I think that this is a good question that we can go over based on this. So he says he has a serious gameplay question. Should he sell Zaha and Angelino rares to buy Hugo Kuipers? These last few game weeks, my forwards have been utterly useless with Zaha not playing. Also, I have against stack. I think that's definitely something that fits into what we're discussing here. I think you need to look at it and you need to decide how much more important would it be for me to have a Kuipers that matches up with my gank stack. Do I think I'm selling the Zaha and Angelinos at highs because or lows, and vice versa on Kuipers? Is Kuipers price high or low to where it comparatively should or could be? That's something I think people struggle with as well. Lots of people just jam in guys that are in form. People love guys that are in form, and I think that's just the worst way you can go about it. I think that you can buy guys that are out of form, maybe that are going to be coming into form in theory, that makes sense. I don't want to use any of these guys as an example, but like Kuipers, he's someone that's obviously really hot, but he fits great with a gank stack or with a against stack. Also, he could leave. There has been rumors about his transfer, which would obviously, I don't really see a positive transfer for him. Realistically, like I just don't like it. Just doesn't seem like a transfer that would make much sense. So I think you need to sit down. This is where planning, and people make mistakes when they just rush into something. They're just like, I want Kuipers, I'm going to get rid of these guys. And that's when people make mistakes and set themselves back in gallery. Because one of the biggest things you can do, and people also underestimate this, is if you are someone that does not have the ability to put funds in, or you do not have that ETH or cash balance sitting there like Laird talked about, and you rush into something and make a mistake and it costs you 0.4 ETH because you just did something without thinking about it, and then it ends up being a bad decision, then you have even less funds to spend. So I think people compound their issues of not having the ability to go buy new cards. They compound them by making bad trades or bad decisions that then give them even less funds to go buy new cards with.
I think that point is actually really important, that the number of people who are willing to trade away their cards at low points and to acquire cards that are highs just happens way too much. And like you said, everybody like loves chasing really good scores. And so the Angelino and Zaha combination is really interesting because nobody bought them just for the first 3 games of the season, right? Like you bought them because you think Galatasaray will be great all season and you think they will be good. And so they've struggled, and now everyone's like, well, I'm out. I don't want these guys anymore. And it's like you bought these guys for the long term.
Yes.
And I will consider long term as this season.
Yes.
Because again, people think that Galatasaray is going to be awesome. And so if you are trading them now, you're trading them now because you're like, I don't like these guys anymore. They're not any good. Everyone else thinks that too. Like they're not going to give you any decent value for cards they think are not that good. And so I feel like we've talked about this so many times. You're just digging yourself deeper. And then you're also reducing your depth because now you're trading two usable cards that should be usable throughout the season for one card, particularly in this example, for a guy who could transfer and just be dead anyway. But it just feels like there are, like, those are the situations that I think people end up, like if Galatasaray didn't have a game this weekend, or they played this midweek, right? Yeah. Midweek. So it's theoretically it's helped a little bit, those guys specifically, because people they're going to theoretically should smash this game week. And so people want to buy them, but it's just such a short-term plan for something that you turned your long-term plan into a short-term fix.
Yeah.
And there's just really no reason for it yet.
Yeah. Looking for food brings up a good example. I know you've done this too. He has made a spreadsheet, which has saved him from rushing a fair few times in terms of making decisions that would be detrimental. I think it's a really good help if you guys can't do things with just looking at things and you need to see things visually with a spreadsheet. I think it can help. Like for me, I guess I just do it off of recall. And like the best way for me to understand where holes are is I'm building lineups every week. And I don't really care if I have holes in certain lineups. So if I have a U23 rare lineup that has a hole, I don't really care. But if I'm sitting there and I'm building a lineup and I'm like, oh man, this U23 rare pro lineup has just this shitter every week in the defender spot. And I'm just like, well, this is ugly. And it's like every week I have the same issue. I'm like, all right, this is a situation where I probably need to go buy one or two people in this situation. And I can sort of decipher if I have holes in these roles that I can go and look at and buy things. But I think if you don't know exactly what you're doing, or you need to see things visually, building out a spreadsheet that helps give you an indication of where you are strong at, where you're weak at is a positive.
Yeah, there are definitely a bunch of ways to do it. Scosmo here saying a Miro board. I talked to Scosmo about this previously. And so one of the methods that I know that others do, I'm pretty sure Nep does. I know Nep does this. And it's something that you and I think is insane, but I did it recently. I couldn't actually go through with it because I'll get to that. But he goes like 10 weeks out in the lineup builder. And he's like, here's what I can do. Now, there are two issues that I had with it. One is the cap modes get completely killed. And so if you're somebody who does like prioritize the cap mode, and like I try to prioritize super rare 240 because that ETH or cash is important to me. And you can't do that weeks out because L15s change, and it just takes one change for like the lineup to not fit, and then you're just basically blowing it all up. But if you at least do it for your regional competitions and All-Star and U23, you can see the holes, and you can see game weeks where you can make a lineup and all of a sudden you're like, oh, like all of these guys have good matchups. And that's when you can start to at least figure out, or you have four guys with really good matchups, and it gives you time to think, maybe I can make something better from this. And it's 4 weeks out, so it's not like everybody's going to it. I'll say that the more that we do stuff on limited time only, the number of people who do not look ahead is astonishing. Yeah. Like not at all. And so you only have to look 2 game weeks ahead, and you are ahead of most people. If you can do it 4 weeks, like you will get prices that are so much better than you will in 4 weeks if a player is in the right situation. Obviously, particularly this time of year, transfers can always happen, and that can ruin your plans. Somebody gets hurt. But I underestimated the looking ahead in the lineup builder, and I think it's actually the best tool in terms of being able to figure out at least what let's say All-Star Rare Pro is your priority lineup every week. Just go make your All-Star Rare Pro lineup 10 weeks out. And even if, obviously you're not specifically setting them, so you can make changes, but it does give you an opportunity to be like, okay, this game week I don't even know what we're up to now, 397. Like in 405, I have like all of my super rares are dead, or I only have like one good super. And it's like, all right, from now until 405, is there somebody that you can acquire that will make those lineups better, or do you just have to focus on rare competitions in that game week? And how do you make your best rare lineups in that game week? And so I think that part is really helpful, especially because if you are somebody who does not have ETH lying around, it's easier to take from now until game week 405 to get a card as opposed to now until tomorrow. And then that's when you start making the bad decisions.
Yeah, even from an investment standpoint, flipping perspective, I'll tell you the key spot that is like the easiest flip. If you have a U23 goalie in a midweek, or like could go buy one, like this upcoming midweek here, I know there's 3 because I looked, because I always look to know how many there are, to know how important it is to have a lineup, because if there's very minimal people, then I'm not as worried. So for this upcoming game week, there is 3 goalies: Fructal, Heidel, and someone else.
I'm just going to show how the easiest way to figure out who they are.
Yeah.
So if you go to game week on SorareData and the pick scores, I usually pick limited because it feels like limited has the most cards, although I guess there are some that don't. I guess I'll go rare. If you just go to U23 rare and go by goalie, and you can see, looks like we have 4.
Yeah. Does Tangvik have cards?
He has rares. Oh yeah, Tangvik has cards. Yep.
Okay.
1 super rare.
Okay. So he must be a new
so
starter.
not many.
Yeah. So he must be a new starter. Like he just started. Go back to his player page. He just started this weekend. So like he's a guy that it was not starting until just now. So like
and I have no idea. I don't know anything about this guy. So do your own research and all that stuff. So let's call it 3. And
Alex has said that Tangvik won't start. He just sort of got a spot start.
Oh, okay, great. Oh, that's the Hansen. Oh, is that Rosenberg? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Alex. Let's just pick him on the bench to help.
There you go.
Help everyone out. Anyway, so yeah, 3: Sherpin, Fructal, and Heidel. Yes. That's wild. That's it.
Yes, but that's like if you have. I would guess if we go to these 3 guys, if we go to Sherpin, Fructal, and Heidel, if we go to them like tomorrow, there's a good shot that their prices have gone up from like where they were last week. Because typically people will buy one of these cards over. Yeah. So like, as you see here, like Sherpin over the last month has gone up and he's at his price point or high point now.
That's Fructal. Sherpin doesn't have any limiteds.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But that's rares, right?
This is rare, right?
Yeah. So anyways, he's gone up because people are looking to get a U23 goalie in for this upcoming midweek. So that's like a investment situation that happens typically. But anyways, yeah, I also assume that game week 405 is a international break, and that's why you do not have many players.
For which one?
405. There's an international break.
I was just throwing that out. I didn't.
Oh, okay. I thought you said you didn't have it. But yeah, so I think there's lots of ways you can do stuff like that. You can sit there and decide whether or not to sort of move some depth into other areas. But yeah, like to me, I don't like, you need to be able to. Jonathan has said that yes, it is an international game week. So I was correct. Look at that, Laird. And I haven't even looked ahead, and I know that. See, I'm just crushing it. But it's a situation where I think that people need to understand you need depth. And that's a discussion we've always had, right? Like people very, very rarely respect depth in the way that they probably should, because they just want good players and they don't want guys that are maybe lower end guys, but they can come and be very important in these upcoming game weeks going forward, or just in general, like cap modes. Like cap modes, having guys that are lower quality players is very important, especially if you want to compete in those categories, which some people obviously do. There's definitely some spots to do it more so than others, but people do care about them to some extent.
I want to just hit up this question from Thomas. It said, can we have a tool for charting a watch list, please? This would make possible the visible overall price changes in a watch list. So this is possible. This is one that I did for limited time only recently. But if you just go to the prices tab, you can see all of the players within that watch list. Look at that. Is that growth over the last 3 months?
Look at you.
Wow. But also you can just pick any player in the watch list and it'll show you the trend. So I assume that's what you're referring to, Thomas, but there it is.
Yeah, I also back to your discussion. Lineup Builder is just such a great tool. Lineup Builder is easily the best tool SorareData provides, because you cannot do any of this stuff on Sorare because they don't let you for whatever reason. It's really weird. But the ability to go look in the future and look at different game weeks is huge. The ability to scout out like where you think good matchups are going to be is huge. So the lineup builder, like when I hear people don't use lineup builder, like Fripp, I think said recently he doesn't use the lineup builder. I'm like mind blown. Like,
Yeah.
if you do not use the lineup builder, I do not know what you're doing. Like, I get it if you have one lineup or two lineups, maybe like not using the lineup builder. I get it. Like, you don't need to. You have very few cards. But if you have like, I don't know, 100 cards, 50 cards, and you're not using the lineup builder, I do not know how you're getting by.
Just like from an organizational standpoint.
Yeah. Like
that's one that blows me away.
Blows my mind. So
Yeah.
Fripp, if he's here, he needs to start using it because
Juju caught my slip up that I'm now going to refer to as a joke, that you can see the Trent, because I used Trent Alexander-Arnold in that trend thing, but I didn't. Yeah, that wasn't unfortunately not on purpose. Haber said, "What do we think of Zora's latest tweet means?" What did he say?
I don't know.
I actually don't even want to know.
I can't keep up with it. Gotta go check it out now, though.
Yeah, Ali said, "Can we have a tool in the collection that shows total cost, current value, and value of rewards won by all players in the collection?" I believe that is all in the plans, but it's a pretty significant job, and so we're working on it.
So Zura's tweet is a dog with eyes with a soccer ball and then says soon. So I'm going to be honest, whenever this type of shit happens, I do not look at it. By the way, did you watch my show with Maxime and notice that I did not drop any swear words whatsoever and he dropped an F-bomb while you were gone there?
Sean, I'm going to be honest, it's the only show I haven't listened to yet.
Wow, the disrespect. I cannot believe that. We'll have to let Maxime know.
Well, I actually listened to his show, but not. So what?
Yeah, so that is Zura's tweet.
Why do they do this?
I don't know. I don't care about stuff like this. Like, it just doesn't. I don't care. It's like when they used to drop other hints and stuff, and I'm like, I just don't care.
I never understood any of them. Rel said a dark theme on SorareData. We've said this before, but all new pages that we put out will be in dark mode, and then we have to go back and change the others. It's an absurdly significant project that,
yeah,
we'll get there. They're not 100
features. So. New features will have both, but old features takes a while to get back. But that also is why like new features may take longer to come out than they previously would have, because instead of creating one design and template, you have to create multiple.
Yeah. Juju said it's going to be Sorare Go, walking the dog and catching Sorare cards in the wild. Yeah, it's definitely.
So it's kind of like Pokemon Go.
Imagine Sorare creating a game where you had to go outside.
That couldn't be me.
You selling that gallery, Sean?
yeah, it definitely would have to be removed from the platform in that situation. I think.
The final straw.
Yeah, that would break the camel's back. We can't be going outside. Like, that's just a nah.
Yeah. Chani's asking about Maxime and Andy clashing. I'm going to talk about that later in the week. I don't think this is the.
I didn't see that. Was it entertaining? I heard about it.
So what made it more entertaining was Maxime on Friday during office hours said that how did he put it? He watched back when they were talking about it, and he said Andy looked and acted like a disappointed dad because he was so disappointed in how Maxime argued. So I would never say this publicly, but I agreed with Andy.
Wasn't Maxime disrespecting Marvin?
It wasn't even that part, but he did absolutely disrespect Marvin. And so, yeah, I actually didn't care about Marvin. There was a whole thing about goalies being too expensive. And I think it started with the whole Pap winning Matt Ryan and for being first in Challenger Rare Pro. And then it's like goalies are overvalued or they're too expensive. And Andy kind of sides with the whole, you have to pay to buy these cards and goalies are part of the game and that's it. He also said, yeah, that MLS is less balanced than the Europe top 5 leagues, which is absurd. And I think he started to walk that back. So
Okay.
He knows.
Yeah, that one.
So Maxime, I guess this is turning into the place of it. Maxime didn't make the comment that it's not that easy to debate somebody in your second language. And as somebody who has no second language, I just can't fathom trying to have an argument about it. So
true.
But yeah, great show. Highly recommend. And don't worry, I'm catching up on the shows. I'll catch up on you and Maxime soon. But I did hear that, you said you kept it clean. So I trusted you on that.
See?
Yeah. Also, thank you for the extra work last week while I was on the beach.
Got to pick up for you while you're sitting on the beach chilling.
I appreciate that. Somebody's got to go outside.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. If I cannot go outside and have to pick up more responsibilities, that's you got to take that. That's a no-brainer.
Right. I'll go outside so you have a reason to stay inside. Anyway. So do you find that, I actually would like to get back to this topic because it inevitably affects me much more than it affects you. The idea of selling cards that like you may have plans for later in order to help you now, like the whole thing with Haber selling like 12 rare or trading 12 rares for like one super rare. It does feel like a lot of our conversations inevitably get to, you just need better cards, and turning 12 rares that are helpful with depth, but are not priority cards in your lineup, in your gallery, to acquire like a super rare that you could use more of. At what point is it bad to do that move? Because I feel like a lot of our advice to people inevitably is just get better cards. Like the goal for all of us is to turn our not so great cards into good cards, and then our good cards into a great card. And you're not doing that. It's not like you're moving 10 shitty cards into 10 good cards. It's like usually 10 to 2 or 10 to 1. And so when does it, or at least what do people need to think about when they think that it's, oh, I never use these cards and let me turn them into something good?
I mean, I think one of the keys is to look at things in a objective way when looking at your cards, but you need to, people buy cards at high value all the time, and then like they have one bad game, like I'm out, this guy sucks. And it goes to what you're talking about with Angelino. Like if you're sitting there and you bought Angelino a month ago and he's had one bad game and then picked up a little injury and hasn't played, and you're like, well, I'm out. Well, what has really changed from when you liked Angelino to now you don't like Angelino? Now counter to that is, let's say you have legitimate reasons why you now do not like Angelino compared to how you, I will give an example on that. I, as you know, was a big fan of Sven Misnon's going into this season. I was like, this is a really good card to have. I think he's going to move back into the Reinders role. He should be better than he was. Good shot he has sets. After 2 games, I do not love what I've seen from him. I've seen him look not great in his role. I've seen him not really take sets. It's been almost all Sugawara. And I've got a bit of info that I now maybe do not like Mignon as much as I did previously. So maybe he's a situation where I look at him and I'm like, all right, well, I've paid 0.9 ETH for him. I can get 0.75. I think I should probably take that because I think it's a good move to get out of. On the other side, if I look at Angelino, I'm like, I paid 0.3 for Angelino. I could get 0.6 for him, but it's like, I like that card for these reasons. I haven't seen these reasons play out yet because it just hasn't been fully relevant yet what I'm seeing with stuff. I'm not going to sell him at the low. So I think what people need to do is like, you should not always buy guys at their high point. If you're always buying guys at the high point, you're just not doing things correctly. I'm not saying you shouldn't buy guys at their high point sometime. If you look at a card and you're like, well, Carlos Gil's at his highest value, but he just smacks hundreds every week, and you're like, I really could use that. Yeah, sometimes you have to go buy that card. But you shouldn't buy every card who's just in form like, I'm going to assume, here's a good example. And again, this is someone we love, but the Lord he's averaging his L3 like 98. Like that's like his L3. And Yeah, so like as you see here, his price hasn't really gone up. I guess it's gone up from where it was like a month ago, but it's not really gone up that much. But yeah, his current auction is 0.33, which would be the highest sale in, let's see, in ETH terms. That's his highest sale since, I'm still going back, since like
3 days
6
ago.
months ago.
3 days.
Oh, well, yeah. Okay. So, but before that, it was like 6 months ago. Yes. So
No, it was 6 days.
if you look at it and you're like, well, this guy is the greatest, I'm going to go buy him. Okay, that's fine. But then like when he doesn't score against Ghent in next week, I'm going to give him, I'm just going to pretend he's going to score against Molenbeek because they don't look that good. But let's say he doesn't score away against Ghent, and then you're like, well, I'm selling him. Didn't score a goal, didn't keep up 100 average that he's got. Oh, that's not going to cut the job. Yeah, you see his limiteds have gone up quite substantially over the last like 4 days. But that's because he's strung another game together. And like from now to where he was August 1st, he's gone up like 100%. So if you're buying him at this current price point and then he doesn't score a goal against Ghent, don't just go sell him. In that situation, you should have thought more about buying him to begin with, if that's your new view on things.
Yeah, I do think.
Do I mow my own lawn? Absolutely not. I did the first year I moved into my house and realized it sucked horrendously, and I was like, I'm not doing that anymore.
I just want to clarify Haber's clarification. We were not talking about you.
Yeah,
with Angelino. Someone else mentioned it earlier. So yeah, I don't know if. Well, I guess obviously Vanaken is a good example here because we see, at least on the limited side, his price rises a bit. It's funny that it doesn't. He's one of those cards that I feel like should have. I guess that volume is pretty good, but like he's got 312 rare cards. Like there are very few players who have been minted as much as the Lord. So I guess that's why we do see it. But it does feel like the knee-jerk reaction to performances early season also happen when players start with tougher matchups. And so, if you buy a player because you're like, he's going to have a really good season, and then they start off slowly because they just happen, the way the schedule works, they have bad matchups at the beginning of the year and they're struggling, and everyone's like, well, this guy is actually terrible. I was wrong about this. And then they sell out, at least those cards. And I think it's important to remember that it's such a short-term view. Like what just happened is not necessarily indicative of what's going to happen in the future. And those hard games are out of the way. Like I was getting all fired up about, well, actually I wasn't at all, but with this Alexander Maxim red card this weekend, obviously he misses a game next weekend, but I wasn't expecting much away to Galatasaray to start the season. So, and now he doesn't have that game anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to just like panic sell because of that.
Jace just said to look at Hatate. Hatate could be a good example because Hatate did not play in the first week. So I'm assuming his price sort of tanked off of that a bit. Yeah, like he's gone down. But like go look at his scoring. Yeah, like look, Hatate has gone down 75% in limiteds, mainly just because he didn't play week 1. That was why he went down. And he did not play week 2. Now, granted, I also don't think Hatate should have been selling probably for what he should have, what he was. But yeah, so Roland brings up that limited managers are way more reactionary than higher scarcity managers. 100% limited. And part of that's the price point. Like you can get in and out of cards and it's not super expensive. However, you look at it and the actual difference between what you paid versus what you could have paid is way, way less. So it's so Javier brings up,
but even for rare, like
yeah, it's gone down a substantial amount, 25%. So Javier brings up that his problem with DFS and Sorare has always been that he can't tell if his process is bad or if he's just running bad. I think that is one of the most difficult things to do in Sorare and DFS is actually being able to tell if what you're doing is, and to be fair, there isn't like there's lots of gray area too, right? Like there's what you're doing is okay, but it could be way better as well within the thing. So like your process could be fine, but it could be way improved upon as well. So like there's not just a good or bad, there's a it's okay, it's decent, it's not that good. And then there's lots of different parts that it falls into. And I think the best way to sort of look at it is you really have to put in the time when researching it to decide. And that's like one of the keys. If you do not have funds to just go buy new cards frequently because of whatever reason that you have for that, you need to put in thought before you enact on whatever plan you're going to enact on to make sure that you get the most bang out of your buck. And obviously, like if you have a gallery, you have restraints within that gallery that you sort of have to match those plans with. So I think that getting out of certain packs of cards and moving into other packs of cards, depending on like what your parameters are, does make sense.
I will say that the process review is much easier in DFS because everyone has the same player base and you can see what winning people did. It's not helpful for me to like look at your lineup, your SO5 lineups, to help me figure out if my process is right, because our galleries are just so different. So it's a lot harder. That doesn't mean that you can't figure out if your process is good or not. And I think that might be the single most important skill when it comes to Sorare, is understanding if your process is good or not. And it's not something that's easily learned, but it takes time to figure out what processes do work, and if you are doing that, why they're not working. And sometimes guys just have bad games. Who was it? It might have been a NEP stream recently. He was talking about Fernando Goriran. And Goriran had this run that was just, it wasn't good. He had like 10, it felt like 10 straight games where he scored like 45. And NEP like looked into every single game, and in like what felt like 7 of the 10, he had either like multiple big chances missed or big chances created. And he's like, if any of those get converted, everything changed.
Yeah.
And so the process of playing him was right in those situations. It's just sometimes the ball doesn't go in the back of the net, and that doesn't mean it was like a bad decision. It didn't work out.
Yeah. Well, and margins, especially in SO5, are super thin. Like I had Douglas Santos yesterday, put up 53. Okay. He had a assist off the crossbar. He had an assist saved off the line. And then he picked up a yellow where it was like a close challenge to where he could have made the tackle. So like just this, right? The difference between a tackle won and a tackle lost and a yellow card is like 13 points. And it's usually like this thin. Like you're talking about like he missed it by an inch, or he got it, or the ref screwed up the call and got it wrong. But yeah, because you're talking like a tackle won is 4.5 points, plus it's beneficial for bonuses. A tackle loss that is a yellow card is worth 7 points because it's a tackle, or it's a dual loss, a foul conceded, and a yellow card. So you're talking 11.5 points purely on those stats. Then it also impacts the bonuses as well. And you're talking 12, 13 points worth of equity in that one decision in a game. Well, when most players don't even have a 12-point AA, that is a tremendous difference in what they score on a game. A great example, too, is like Tadic yesterday. Tadic had a penalty. The difference between missing and making that penalty because it was on his second decisive, even though it was his second decisive, not even his first one, the difference is 17 points. Or it's even more. Is it more than that?
No, it's more. Yeah.
It
depends if it was
20.
saved or,
It's 20. Yeah, so the difference in that is 20 points. So the difference between Tadic having a 75 yesterday and a 95 was him missing a penalty. So, like, the margins can be razor thin on things. And, yeah, like, you have a guy, and the guy created, like, that's one of my favorite things. That's why I always like Carlos Gil. That's why whenever Carlos Gil goes through a bad stretch, I'm just like, okay, you guys are all dumb because everyone is doubting the GOAT. And you look at it, it's like, this dude had 8 chances created, 5 big chances created, and 3 shots on goal last game, and he had a big chance missed, and he put up 60. And he had all of that and put up 60. It's like someday one of those is going to go in the back net. And when that
Yeah.
happens, you get 90. So that's it's just, there's definitely things you can look into within your players and look at from an objectively non-biased perspective and be like, all right, this play was pretty good, or this play was not very good. And a lot of it comes from I would say, offensive AA perspective. If you look and your guy had like 8 chances created and 4 big chances created and no decisive, that's not likely going to happen all the time. Like, likely one of those will go in at some point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. The Roland kind of sums this up well. It takes time to understand, and people are just not patient enough. I feel like it probably takes 6 months to a year to analyze if your process is correct or not. This actually, that pushes me back to the DFS thing, that I assume it was Jordan Cooper who said it once to me, but he was like, theoretically, you need like hundreds or thousands of results to really have enough of a sample size to know how your process, whether your process is good or not. And that's why NFL is so tough, because there are just so few slates that theoretically it would take a century to get enough results for you to analyze them. We don't have that in Sorare either. I mean, there are tons of game weeks, like every single one is pretty much different. It's easier to know if your process is bad as opposed to good. Like, it's easy to see if you messed up immediately. Or not even messed up. If your process is wrong, you're always splitting your goalie and defender, and you're just like never pairing them together, and you don't understand why. Like, that's bad process.
Yes.
But playing Tadic in your best lineup and he happened to miss 2 big chances, although Haber's convinced one's going to be taken away, meaning outside of the penalty.
Yeah, Haber told me one was a mistake.
Yeah.
That's what he told me too.
Opta Haber hopefully fixes that. But anyway, it just takes time. But I don't think anybody ever really goes back and looks at their results. Of like, I think people look at it and say, I mean, I did a whole show about it. Like, you rabbit hunt, and, oh, if I'd only played this guy here. And if you really think of it and you go back to Thursday and you're like, was there any moment on Thursday that you would have actually played that card there? And you're like, no, I would never do that. It's like, well, then your process is not bad. And results are obviously going to sway how we feel, but everybody really should just go back and review their process and be like, am I building in the best way for my gallery?
Yeah. So Adri just asked what we think of Luis Diaz from Liverpool. Haber said that we do not give opinions for different players. So I think that we will use this as an example to discuss situations as well. People react to matchups that suck ass so much. Like, guys, and you used your example with Alexander Maxim. You know how much Laird gives a shit about his Alexander Maxim card this weekend? Zero. He is expecting absolutely nothing from it. But people think like big games matter. Big games don't matter at all. The games that matter are the games against the turd boxes. If I have PSV guys and they're up at home against Camber, that's a lineup I care about. If they're away at Ajax, I don't care about that game at all, because that game's irrelevant to me, because I'm never going to be playing them in good lineups in that game in theory. Or like if I have Liverpool guys and Liverpool played Chelsea this weekend, Liverpool was away to Chelsea. I don't really care about what the result was in the Liverpool game against Chelsea, because that game's not a game where they're going to be in my good lineups. Like, yeah, sure, am I going to play some of the guys? Like, I played Trent Alexander-Arnold in the lineup and he sucked. Fine. Like, that is not relevant. I'm not looking at Trent Alexander-Arnold from this weekend and being like, oh man, Trent Alexander-Arnold, that was an awful buy. I need to go sell him because he sucks now. Or vice versa. I'm not like, nothing has changed in my opinion. Yeah. So Daniel Cooper said Liverpool at home next week against Bournemouth. All right. Now, if Trent Alexander-Arnold puts up 20 points at home against Bournemouth, then I maybe need to relook at things and worry a bit more. If he's away against Man City, I don't care, because that game just doesn't really matter. So like, part of why you're buying players too, and this is why obviously buying players on better teams is more important, is as much as it would be cool if it was Sorare was like impacted by like big games and like Real Madrid against Barca was like extra points and like you really care about it. You don't care about those games at all. You care about the games where they play the shitbags in the league and can just destroy them. Those are the games that are really impactful.
Right. Like, nobody ever bought Luis Diaz to play him away to Chelsea.
Yeah. Like, you might play him, in a lineup. Like if I had Luis Diaz, I might play him in a lineup, but I'm not sitting there like, okay, Luis Diaz, baby, against Chelsea, gas 3, champ 3, fire him up. I don't know. Luis Diaz, though, back to the question for Adri. I think he's just like most of the Chelsea players where he's like fine and nothing special. The issue for all the Chelsea guys that's been the case for a couple years is they just don't really pop. They don't really have upside. And I don't think that is any difference for Luis Diaz. Like, I mean, we have a pretty good sample. Luis Diaz has now started 30 games at Chelsea, and in those 30 games, Liverpool, I'm sorry, in those 30 games, he's cracked 80 like 3 times, and he's never cracked 90. So like we have decent sample with Luis Diaz, and I don't really see it changing much because I don't really see them super improving. So I think he's a card that's okay. Like you could use him in some spots, and other spots you're not going to be interested. And even when you play him, you're never really going to hit these super high end because in 30 games, he has 16 decisives, a couple of the games with multiple decisives, and he's just never really smashed out hundreds or anything. So, but that's been my interpretation with Salah too over the last few years is like he just doesn't really have that peak upside that you're really like salivating for because that's what you need to really do well anymore in the game is you need those guys that are going to produce monster games. And I'm not saying they can't get one. Like Salah has hundreds and 99s in his logs. Like it's definitely a reasonable possibility, but it's just not going to be as frequent as some other players.
Yeah, like this is the score chart for Luis Diaz at Liverpool in starts.
Yeah.
And he's hit 85 twice and never higher than that. In fact, he's been over 80 just one other time.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing his Porto stats were nicer.
Yeah.
There we go. Like this is not happening again.
I don't think. No, I mean he's a 3 or 4 point better player with Porto than what he is here. But that's not to say he can't go out there and put up 100 sometimes. It's definitely possible, but it's less likely. You're going to have less spots where it's going to be an appealing play.
Right. Like amazingly, is his AA exactly the same? Oh, 9.7 versus 9.8, which is impressive. I actually was expecting his AA to be higher at Porto,
Same.
But as you can see, it's not. But Liverpool, like I don't think he gets as many decisives at Liverpool.
Yeah.
Which sounds crazy because Liverpool is theoretically one of the better teams in the Prem, but like Porto kills people.
Yeah, it's like why we've bashed on players like Darwin Nunez, and Darwin Nunez just isn't that good at Liverpool. Like, in order to be the player that he was at Benfica, he needs to score a shitload more goals, and it's just not realistic that he's going to score. Like when he was in starts at Benfica, he had 48 decisives in 54 starts, so he averaged almost a decisive a game. At Liverpool, he has 13 decisives in 24 games. Still a reasonable rate, but it's nowhere near. Yeah, it's nowhere near the 90% rate he had when he was at Benfica, and that's why when you look at Darwin Nunez in 24 starts at Liverpool, he has one game over 76. And like you just look at it, and you're just like, this just isn't gonna cut it as a card realistically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Jerem brings up Liverpool should be better. That's fair. Liverpool can be better, but I don't really think it impacts these guys tons. Like I don't think they're going to score a boatload of goals that they would have elsewhere. And that's kind of what they need because their AA isn't good. Like as you see Darwin Nunez at Liverpool, his AA is 4. And even at Benfica, though, his AA was 6. So it wasn't like it was like he was a 15 AA player at Benfica. No, he scored more goals. And I don't think that you can expect him at Liverpool to put up 30 plus goals in a season.
I used to do season-long projections for the Premier League, and I used to get a lot of shit for them because everybody would tell me my goal projections were too low. And I think people always think of it as like an individual thing. And we're like, oh, how many goals could Salah score? And you're like, 25. How about Diaz? 20. Darwin, 22. And all that you like start adding it up. And you're like, Liverpool's not going to score 240 goals this year. And everyone was like, oh, okay. And it's like, well, find the number and then work your way down.
Yeah.
And then that's when your expectations start to make more sense.
Yeah. Like, I mean, here is like, all right, last year's Premier League season, Liverpool scored 75 goals. The year before they scored 94. So like, let's say they score, let's say they hit in the middle at 85. And then you start breaking it down and you give like 10 goals to center backs. All right, you're at 75. You give 10 goals to Trent and Robertson and like fullbacks. So like, all right, you're at 65. Give like 15 goals to midfielders. All right, you're at 50. Then you have Luis Diaz, Darwin Nunez, Sala, Jota, everyone. And all of a sudden you're like, there's not 100 goals to be scored by these guys. There's a minimal amount of goals to be scored by these guys. So I think that's something that definitely can be looked at by people.
Yeah, it's just like fundamentally you have to put it in perspective. And even if they're much better, you still need to parse out all of the goals. And
also, it doesn't matter. So Haber just said he doesn't think Liverpool will be better this year. It necessarily doesn't matter that Liverpool is better or worse. It also matters if other teams are better or worse. And like, for example, if I look at the Premier League for this upcoming season, I think that from last season, I think Man City will be worse. I think Chelsea, or I think Arsenal maybe will be a little worse, just because I don't know if it's realistic they put up their score line. But I think like Man U will be better. Maybe Newcastle will be better. Brighton will be better. So like some of these other teams maybe will be better, and therefore you have less matchups. Like the games that you really want to, the games that really matter and the really impactful games are like against bottom 7 teams, like bottom third of the table teams. And those are the games that are the really impactful ones. And what you do against Chelsea, Alex Wilson says Chelsea will be worse. I'm not convinced Chelsea is worse than 44 points. Personally, that is probably stretching it a bit far on Chelsea hate. But it's a situation where not necessarily Liverpool being better is that impactful if other teams are also better. And it really just depends how you beat up on minnows. Like if you beat up on minnows and you smash the lower end teams, it can be really helpful.
Surprised you think Brighton's going to be better.
No, I'm just giving examples. I don't necessarily think they'll be better.
Oh.
I don't necessarily think like Arsenal will be worse or City will be worse, but I mean, City probably will be worse. City, I think, has less depth. Kevin De Bruyne's out for a while. Like they probably will be a little worse, but yeah.
Sean, we got more minutes for Julian Alvarez. They'll be better.
Well, true.
100-point season.
There you go.
I don't know. I forget what we were even talking about today. Does that mean we should be finished?
Laird is still on vacation time, guys.
Oh, Haber said City will smash when they get Doku.
God, I hope Doku smashes. It's the only thing I care about. You see what he ripped in 99.9 this weekend, Laird? Yeah,
I mean, no way he is better at City in season 1 than if he stays at Rennes.
Yeah,
no way.
I have concern.
1% not even.
At Rennes, he was just going to play more. So it's just more of like if he plays at City, his minutes will be more impactful most likely than Rennes. But I don't think you're going to get near as many starts as you would have at Rennes.
Expecting any sort of meaningful minutes at Man City is just ignoring Pep Guardiola's entire tenure at that club.
Well, I think there are some minutes for him to be had because I just do not think they have tons of right wing options. But like you said, meaningful minutes. Like meaningful minutes would be he's going to start. How many meaningful games are you going to get from him? And that's tricky.
How about this? And it's a complete theoretical because of an injury. But with both players fit, who do you think would have played more this season? Doku at Man City or Arda Güler at Real Madrid?
Güler. Definitely Güler.
Okay.
There's a lot more holes there, and they are much more willing to rotate some guys in.
Who's more willing?
Real Madrid would have been more willing to play Güler.
Oh, to play him.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think either of them would have played enough. The only positive with Güler is that you probably would have known when he was going to play.
Yeah.
And Doku, you just never.
Yes. I would have had a better idea of when Güler was going to get playing time. Like I have a feeling that if Güler didn't get injured, I probably would have got 10 to 15 starts out of him, knowing quite a few of them.
Yeah. And Doki, you'd likely have 3 that you would know.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for joining us. I don't think I even thanked everyone for coming at the beginning because I'm rusty. It's a week off. I don't know what I'm doing. So thank you everybody for joining us. Please like and subscribe, all that good stuff. Shout out to Quinny there, who I didn't see today. But so schedule change for this week slightly. Limited time only is going to be tomorrow instead of Wednesday. And then we'll see what happens the rest of the week. But yeah, thanks for everyone for joining, and we'll see you next week.